What's the password? Welcome to the Game Master Speakeasy. Brought to you by the record button.
Hello, and welcome to the Game Master Speakeasy. Come on in and grab a drink from Grognak, today's bartender, take a seat by the ever-burning hearth, and relax as we talk to you about tabletop role-playing games. Sometimes we touch on other stuff, but mostly tabletop role-playing games. I'm your host, Cody.
And I'm Lance.
Who is also your other host. And today we're going to be talking about how to build character, or, building characters, both for players and game masters. But first, something new, or at least new to us.
What do you got?
So starting number 1 is the Dark Archive book for Pathfinder 2. I've got the release date. The release date's been out, but I want to talk about this product just a little bit.
Okay,
It's coming out in July, and I expect we will use the content in it to great effect. July of 2022, the current year that we are currently airing this episode. But you in particular, because of your level 16 witch, warlock, what have you, who has transitioned from 5e, you might be able to find some use out of this book. Dark Archive is going to have 2 new classes. It's going to have the Psychic, and then it's going to have, oh god, I forget the other one, but it uses, I can tell you all about the other class. It's like a monster hunter type. I think it might just be called the Occultist, now that I'm thinking about it. But it uses, it's like rather than casting spells, they collect trinkets and artifacts and things to use to power. Like, one of the core abilities of the class is you pick 1 to 3 over the course of leveling up special relics that do different things. Like, one of them is like a special goblet that you pick if you want to focus on being a healer.
Okay.
Because you can let people take a sip from the goblet to heal a little bit, or you can like fully down the contents of the goblet for a once per day special effect or something like that. I remember reading the play test for these classes.
So, supportish class.
Well, that depends. If you pick the weapon as your relic, now you're suddenly very offensive.
Gotcha.
So that kind of is where your subclass or your specializations come from, is which relics you pick. But the whole class, at least in the playtest, you were trained in all 4 of the magical knowledge skills. Arcana, occultism, religion, because the whole class has a lot of mechanics about recalling knowledge and then getting bonus damage against that creature.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and then the Psychic is all about using psychic powers, and mechanically actually kind of fits the Warlock from 5e, because it's, at least in the playtest version, which could be very different than the final product in Dark Archive, they had a lot of like amped cantrips, using their focus points to cast beefy versions of existing cantrips, or doing special abilities.
Okay.
And then
That might be a better pairing for my witch than Oracle.
Maybe. We'll see. But in the meantime, we'll make do with what we got. But also, other things include, and these are the bullet points: strange cryptids glimpsed in the night, gear to track them, and the powers you might gain by surviving an encounter with one, which is very interesting.
What's a cryptid?
A cryptid is like, for example, in the real world, like Sasquatch is a cryptid.
Oh, okay.
You know, you've got the Jersey Devil is a
Urban
cryptid.
legends.
Yeah, or like legendary dark cultish creatures. That is what a cryptid is. So imagine like having an encounter with Sasquatch, surviving, and then being able like to pick up a car or something. That's what when I read that bullet point, that's what I imagine. Or an encounter with Mothman and you get future sight or something like that.
And we'll talk about our encounter with Mothman later.
Cults and esoteric belief in apocryphal divine magic, and the secret of, here, listen to this one, and the secret of becoming a living vessel for an eldritch being.
Okay, that sounds like Aram's exact job.
Yep, that's exactly what would be right up your warlock's alley.
I would go with that.
Temporal anomalies with archetypes that skim along the surface of time, and a new mystery for oracles unbound from causality. So there you go, Paizo. There's some free advertising. This book will come out in July. Which I assume late July, whenever Gen Con is. This is going to be the big Gen Con.
Are we doing Gen Con like in, for real this year, or are they still doing it remotely?
I think they might be doing it for realsies.
Ooh.
You know what? They might have done it for realsies last year. I don't remember.
I thought they were doing it remotely again, but last year, but
Were
I could
they?
be wrong.
Okay.
I could be wrong.
Should we try to go?
I mean, if they're going to have it for realsies, I'd like to go. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
We could
of
do an
fun.
entire episode about the things that we saw and did at Gen Con.
For those who don't know, Gen Con is the world's largest tabletop convention, and not just role-playing games. Board games, I think, dominated like 40% of the table space. It's also trading card games. I remember Fantasy Flight Games had a pretty big booth for both Legend of the Five Rings and other things, but there was a pretty big Legend of the Five Rings area. I remember seeing some Warhammer. Well, I liked that, but demoed a lot of board games.
It's like Shangri-La for tabletop nerds.
Yeah, essentially. The other bit of news I had, we've talked about N-World's, N-World being nworld.org, which is a forum and news site for tabletop role-playing games. They usually do. We talked about their top 10 most anticipated games of 2022, and I just want to run through the list.
Drum roll.
Yeah. So number 10 is Werewolf: The Apocalypse 5th Edition.
Okay.
This is the werewolf version of Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah, I've dabbled a little bit. I mean, I haven't played any of it, but I did have an old edition of Vampire. I knew that the what do they call it? The something World of Darkness, maybe.
Yeah, World of Darkness.
That's like a collection of different settings, all in the same universe. Werewolf, vampire. I think they did one with demons.
Mage the Ascension.
Yeah, Mage the Ascension.
I actually am most interested in Mage the Ascension just because I've heard the way they handle magic is awesome.
Is it?
Yeah.
Might be worth looking into. I mean, they've definitely got a good history of good work, and I mean, everybody's kind of familiar with that setting.
Yeah,
At least familiar with
absolutely.
the existence of their products.
We've got number 9, Swords of the Serpentine from Pelgrane Press, which is a sword and sorcery game of daring heroism, fantasy city rife with skullduggery and death. It's
I like skullduggery.
They use they talk about Gumshoe, which is another role playing game. So I'm assuming that this is probably the same company that made Gumshoe, maybe, or maybe they're just referring to Gumshoe as the genre. But Gumshoe investigative role playing system creates a fantasy RPG with a focus on high action role playing and investigation. Swords, the same thing, was actually number 6 in 2020. Number 8 is Cyborg. Stockholm Cartel. It's a nano-infested doomsday RPG about cybernetic punks and misfits raging against a relentless corporate hell. It's a Morkborg hack by Christian Solon, I'm going to murder these names, and Johan Noor of Stockholm Cartel. Number 7. Oh, do you have any questions?
No, I was just going to say that sounds really awesome.
It does. It sounds
Like
awesome.
Cyberpunk Apocalypse.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Yeah. Just the theme screams badass.
If nothing else, the setting sounds fun.
Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
We got Shadow of the Weird Wizard by Schwalbe Entertainment, which is just a family-friendly remake of Shadows of the Demon Lord. So if you want to introduce your young'uns to gaming, this would be a good product to go to. You do not want to introduce your young'uns to Shadow of the Demon Lord. It's a very R-rated, I would say.
Not great for your kids unless they're really mature and you're comfortable with that. But
Yeah, your young teenagers that have already been, they're breaking into the R-rated. You let your teenager go to R-rated movies.
the ones that life is beat up just enough that they're comfortable with a little darkness.
Hello, darkness, my old friend. All right, so next at number 6, we got Rivers of London by Chaosium, which is, I don't really know a whole lot about it, but it's based on some novels by a guy named Ben Aronovich. Aronovich, like Aaron, like Aaron Ovich.
Okay.
So I think that's Aronovich.
I'm going to go with it.
All right.
Aronovich.
And powered by a customized version of the basic role-playing system. Basically, it's an ordinary constable turned mage guy, and he's solving crimes across London. And it's got basically urban fantasy.
Okay.
Kind of like urban fantasy thriller kind of thing going on using the basic role-playing system. Number 5, which is my number 1, is Mothership 1st Edition by Tuesday Night Games.
We've talked a little bit about this.
We've talked about Mothership a couple times. This is the full 1st edition. They have a 0 edition out, essentially. But this is going to have a big rules update, and it's going to be the first version of the game that has the triad, essentially, of the 3 rule books.
Okay.
So you've got the Game Master,
And
the
this was
player...
this was the sci-fi horror one, right?
Sci-fi horror,
Okay.
yep. So it's going to have what is essentially a Game Master's Guide, a player's handbook, and a monster book, essentially, all at once. and I am really looking forward to playing that system. Might run a small campaign, not just a test trial, but actually run it.
I'm a big fan of horror settings, period. And sci-fi horror is one of my favorites, so.
As we talked about last episode, number 4, Avatar Legends is the official name of it.
Okay.
Avatar Legends by Magpie Games. If you listened to last episode, you already know all about it, but it's the Avatar, The Last Airbender, Avatar Legend of Korra RPG. I have looked into a little bit more of it, and I think one of the coolest things is that it encourages you to play, pick an era of the timeline.
I was going to ask about the eras and the timelines, because if they did kind of the Last Airbenders era, then Airbenders wouldn't really even be an option for play. I mean, you'd only have the 3 different bending types.
I think it would be cool to play during the 100-Year War.
That would be cool.
That would be my first choice. We've got. Do you know what Pendragon is?
Like King Arthur.
Well, yeah, but so you're on the right track. There is a game called Pendragon, and it is a King Arthur-esque tabletop role-playing game, and the 6th edition is number 3 on this list.
Okay.
It is a new edition of the Pendragon RPG. The intention of this series of design journals by Pendragon, blah, 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 blah. It's starting, blah, 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 blah. It's basically just, okay, the only thing I can gather is that it's a new edition of Pendragon. But what I do know about Pendragon is that it really pulls in, from what I have read about it so far, the other aspects of being a knight aside from just ride into battlefield, attack enemy, right? There's actual chivalric codes. You've got your round table discussions. There's probably a lot more intrigue involved.
Yeah, I mean, if you just needed people murdered, you could hire mercenaries for stuff like that. Knights had an actual role in society.
That's right.
That was far deeper than just poking things with swords.
Yes.
Although they did some of that, too.
They did some of that. We've got, at number 2, Broken Tales by The World Anvil Publishing. The players belong to the Order, which is a secret group operating on behalf of the papacy. Basically, it's if you've ever seen like Hellsing the anime, or read the manga, which is like the church has a vampire
the
that
Iscariot
hunts down.
organization.
Yeah, they have basically you're hunting. It's kind of like hunting down fairy tales, and it's basically a dark horror fairy tale working for a secret order of the papacy kind of game, which I think you go and hunt down a twisted big bad wolf who's been blowing down entire city blocks. Maybe.
All right, I'm into it.
That's my first idea to run a game in. But I've also been rereading the Fables comic recently as well, so maybe that's why I find that to be particularly exciting. And then last is a licensed sci-fi tabletop RPG. Can you take a guess at which Ridley Scott franchise it is?
I'm not going with Aliens on this because we've already got one of those games.
Yeah, what else has Ridley Scott made?
Prometheus?
Well, Prometheus is Alien adjacent.
That's
right?
true.
Blade Runner.
Oh, yeah, we did talk about that, didn't we?
Yep, that is the number 1 most anticipated, according to this poll, RPG. And do you know who is making it? Free League Publishing.
Okay.
Another one from Free League Publishing.
These guys have been busy.
Very busy. They just knock them out of the park. But Free League Publishing is making the official Blade Runner RPG that will propel players into the streets of Los Angeles as Blade Runners with unique special abilities, personalities, and memories. I would be super excited to play this game.
I'm the kind of person that can't get enough of like the cyberpunk setting.
Yeah, that's that. You and more. You like cyberpunk and you like more hard sci-fi.
Yeah.
Yep.
But I mean, I'm sure my bias comes from the fact that my first ever tabletop game was Shadowrun.
Definitely.
Which is, cyberpunk plus fantasy elements. So, yeah, for me, the cyberpunk part of that game was always my favorite part of it anyway. Most of my characters were humans with cyberware.
That's totally agreeable. Now, that said, what are we drinking today?
Well, much like last episode, I brought something homemade. This is actually a jar of homemade mead. Very, very basic mead recipe. It is champagne yeast, distilled water, and honey. Yep. That's it. And it eventually turned into alcohol, given enough time and space to do stuff.
Honestly, as the person sitting here drinking it who didn't make it, if I close my eyes and I take a sip, which I'm about to do right now, I just picture if I was going to drink liquid honey that had a little bit of alcohol in it, Well, actually, I don't know what the alcohol content would be, but a little bit of alcohol taste in it. That's what it tastes like.
I mean, it's got champagne yeast in it, so your average
Yeah.
champagne's what, 18%? Or am I way overestimating the amount of juice in a...
Honestly, beats me.
Okay, well, whatever you're getting for your alcohol content in your average champagne is what this stuff's coming out as.
Yeah. It's pretty tasty, though. I like it.
Well, good.
I would recommend home brewing mead. All right. So that said, let's build character. Let's talk about building characters.
All right.
In tabletop RPGs. This is the meat and potatoes of this episode. The
Character
the
creation.
flesh on the bones. Character creation, not just for the players, but also for the game masters, or vice versa. Let's start with players, though.
Okay. We discussed this kind of a little bit in the player responsibilities in the last episode, but setting, and setting.
Setting. And what you mean by that is take into account the world that you're playing in.
Make
right?
a character appropriate to the universe that you are playing in. That's very important. That's going to be very important for the GM to write stories that give your character that spotlight and that 15 minutes of fame.
Yep.
If you are a square peg that just does not fit in the round hole of the setting, it's going to be considerably more difficult.
Have you ever seen that TikTok or that little short video
Where he like the one hole, he can just angle it and drop everything in
goes
there.
in the square hole.
Yep.
No.
The lady's watching him, and she's getting more and more angry every time he drops it in the same square hole. It's great.
Just physically anxious. But that's a good point. You even if you can put the round peg in the square hole, you should seek not to.
Yeah.
You should ask your dungeon master or game master about what type of game they're going to be playing. Game masters think about this ahead of time and let your group know.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a game master and you're about to start a new campaign, before you really even pull the players into it, probably a good idea to have a decent grasp on the setting that you're running and the kind of subsetting to that. A good example would be our Pathfinder campaign. Our subsetting is piracy.
Yes.
Like we're doing a lot of like kind of Goonies style pirate adventure-y.
Yeah, that's a good.
Well, it
reference
kind of
there.
got Goonies for me when we decided we had to go raid the temple to empower this gemstone thing.
Hey, you guys.
But that is the setting. So
If you haven't ever seen Goonies, go watch the Goonies.
yeah, I don't know I don't know what went wrong with your childhood if you haven't seen that movie, but
Well, it's
go do
old
it.
now.
So, my kid's seen Goonies a couple of times. He knows the whole shtick.
Does he
because-
like it though? That's
Yes.
I'm serious because some people, you got a young generation of people who some of their favorite Star Wars movies are the prequels.
Yeah, I mean that's true.
So you never know. Goonies might
Yeah.
not hold up to current
No,
tastes.
he does pretty well, like when it comes to movies and stuff like that I introduced him to from my childhood. So that's good.
That's good.
But yeah, I mean, so know the setting. Obviously, we're playing a Pathfinder game, so it is going to be a fantasy setting. But the subsetting to that is even a little bit deeper, in so much as it's a little bit of high seas piracy and stuff like that. So make sure that you make a character that fits into that role, because even a character that you could availably play in a fantasy setting may not fit particularly well in this particular subset of a fantasy setting. You don't want a lawful good paladin palling around with a bunch of pirates.
No, you don't.
You're going to have conflict. That's going to be a problem right out of the gate.
So what you're saying is you should work with your other players
and your GM to ensure
Yeah.
that your character is setting appropriate.
Yes.
Yes, I think that is an absolute necessity.
Let's talk about edgy, dark lone wolves.
I feel like we're picking on Aram again.
No, because Aram is the good way to do it.
Aram learned to get along with everybody else.
That's the thing. For people that are going to be playing a player character, don't make an uncooperative, edgy lone wolf in a game that is cooperative storytelling.
That's very true. And I mean, I won't bag on anybody for doing it, because I think we've all kind of either made that mistake or had a desire to make that mistake, because you get this cool character concept in mind and you're like, yeah, he's again edgy lone wolf type. But what you do have to realize is that this is a team effort. It's a buddy comedy. You're gonna have other people that you have to interact with, and being the edgelord is not usually conducive to that mechanic.
Look, man, I balance all my combat encounters for 6 people, so if you end up going off on your own, good gosh dang luck to you, sir.
Yup.
Yeah. What else? How about this? What do you think is, what should you worry about first? Character concept or the stats on the page?
I think that is entirely dependent upon the type of game that you are playing.
Do go on.
Okay, for example, there are some games that require you to roll stats or roll them in order, or specifically, like the way that your character's stats are bulked out is done in some kind of random-ish manner.
And by stats, you mean the character's strength,
Yep,
dexterity, intellect, and
Yep.
wisdom, charisma, whatever traits or attributes.
I mean,
are given to your
just to
character.
take a recent example, we have started kind of poking around in the Call of Cthulhu books.
Because we've never played
Yep, and-
actual Chaosium published
Yep.
Sandy Peterson Call of Cthulhu before.
I mean, well, technically, I think they had a hand in publishing the Savage Worlds conversion that we did play in.
but that's the Savage Worlds
yeah,
system.
but this is the official stuff that we're talking about. And for example, the character creation system there, you roll your stats in order.
Yeah, so that means, for example, in 7th edition Call of Cthulhu, when you go to find out your character's strength, you roll 3d6, 3 six-sided die, and add the total, and then multiply that total by 5. So if by some freak accident you roll like a 2, a 1, and a 3, that's going to be a 30 in your strength stat, which is not great.
Not great for a brute character, especially.
50 in that game is considered average human. So if you went into character creation thinking, I'm going to make a boxer who is a very physically fit bodyguard, and you roll garbage stats, then suddenly your character concept is hindered.
Yeah, in a system like that, my personal suggestion is either have a handful of character concepts in mind, or go into it with 0 character concepts in mind,
Yeah.
and then build that concept around your stats. Because if you start and you think, I am going to make this really cool archaeologist character, which obviously you're going to want to go heavy on the mental stats for that, and then you roll the stats and the guy's, basically rocking a potato brain, all of a sudden that entire concept just goes out the window. If you go through it with an open mind, you roll the stats and you say, okay, given the stat loadout that I have in front of me, what kind of characters would fit that role? That might make it a little bit easier for you.
Yeah, and if you end up with a character with potato brain, at least try to put some butter and sour cream on there, right?
Little chives.
Yeah, add some bacon. You can still flavor your potato brain character.
That's true. On the other hand, there are other systems that are either less rigid when it comes to stats, or at least more flexible for your assignments. 5th edition or Pathfinder are ones that are very similar in that regard, because you pick your race, and your race has certain stats to it, and you
Ancestry.
ancestry. That's what we're calling
Pick
it.
your
these days,
ancestry.
sorry. You pick your ancestry, and you get certain stats based on that. And then your background, you get certain stats based on that. Well, you have the flexibility to make those choices, and chances are, if you're making a character that is going for brute strength, the ancestry and the background you're going to pick are going to reflect that anyway. So you're already kind of leaning in that direction, and you have that measure of control. A game like Shadowrun, where you just assign your stats as needed, it's the same story. Okay, if I want to make a cyber ninja in Shadowrun, I know that I have to lean into my character's quickness stat. I know I have to lean into the reflexes.
And there's a mathematical system that you work through to support building your cyber ninja. You don't have to worry that you're going to roll up poor dexterity.
Yeah,
or
so
acrobatics or
in a
whatever.
system that generates more random stat arrays, it's almost better to go into it with a more open mind and kind of build the character around the stats. In a system where that's not the case, it's a lot easier to go in with a character concept and build your stats around the character concept.
Now, now this is going to be applicable to both. I'm going to try and fish for an answer here.
All right.
For both player characters and non-player characters, which, I gotta say, one of my coworkers at work, when he wants to make fun of someone lately, he keeps calling them an NPC.
Yeah, no,
he'll point at people and be like, "Look at that guy! What an NPC!"
That's been an internet meme for a while.
Has it? I've been missing out on
Basically, it is a catch-all term for people that don't think for themselves.
Oh, right, right. 'cause
If
the
you
Game
are willing,
Masters.
if you're willing to just float along and do whatever you're told based on whatever the projected narrative, the person calling them an NPC.
You're
believes
just
they're
listening to
operating
J.
under.
Jonah Jameson's rants, and you
Yeah.
believe Spider-Man is the bad guy.
Spider-Man's the bad guy because J. Jonah Jameson said so, and you're not willing to think for yourself. You're an NPC, which is just a term that they ripped off of gaming. So
Which is funny.
yeah.
So to be both applicable to both player characters and NPCs, I'm going to ask you, Lance, what makes a good character for role-playing? ROLE. This is a role-playing game. What makes a good character?
Personality and backstory.
Okay. What components make up a personality?
Background information. I mean, you kind of have to, weird as it sounds, is, build your character from childhood to whatever their existing age is. Not in great overbearing amounts of detail. As a matter of fact, it's kind of nice to leave a little wiggle room in there, because then, you can work with the GM to add stuff as the story goes on that helps that. But I mean, if you're making a character that has a certain, dislike of a certain group, you need to go back through his backstory and explain why.
I agree. That's fun. It's not the answer I was looking for, but keep going.
What was the answer you were looking for?
No, the answer I was looking for is motivations, goals. If you know what your character wants to accomplish, whether it be a player character or an NPC, then you can figure out how they would act. Mm-hmm. It's very true. I want to nail that home for game masters.
Yeah.
If you want your NPCs to be interesting, they should have motivations, whether or not the players know about them. Mm-hmm. Right? So
it's best to build an NPC with like an end game in mind.
Yeah.
And then think of that like a river, and the players are just rocks being thrown in that river, and then that NPC has to figure out how to flow around those players to get to that end goal.
Yeah. So maybe you've got John the fisherman, and he has the goal of eventually saving up enough money, or maybe he has the goal of getting enough money at any cost to save up to move to a new city. Mm-hmm. Then he sees these adventurers, and they're toting around a big bulging coin sack right there, just flaunting it. You might think John the fisherman's getting a little sticky fingered or something like that. Or
he might find a way to fleece the players.
Or yeah.
Or he might be willing to sell out the players to a big bad in order to get that cheddar.
Right. Or if you have that same NPC, but instead of motivations being driven by greed and money, his motivations are he wants to be generous and help people, then now he's just like, hey, strange traveler, you want to try a free sample of my fish? Mm-hmm. Oh, you're looking for information? The mayor's office is down there.
Yeah. Well, I happened to hear some guys over by the dock talking about just that thing the other day.
Right. If you know if you know the things that your character wants to get, whether it is accomplished goals or physical possessions, then that gives you all the clues you need to really make decisions inside of that character's head instead of your own.
Which that really comes, because one of the things about building NPCs as a game master, for your big bads and their lieutenants and stuff like that, and the major plot point characters, it's really important to give them a thorough fleshing out. But if you're just talking about the local fishmonger, you don't want to spend a lot of time making that dude super real. So if you can nail down just that character's motivations, that gives you enough to work with to get the players engaged and have that character interact with the players without having to go through and write his childhood and name his parents and determine whether or not he's got, 2.5 kids and a dog in a shack just down the road.
Oh, yeah.
As long as you know his motivations, that stuff you can kind of do on the fly if you have to.
And what you just talked on there, that's kind of like the difference between like a one-dimensional character or a three-dimensional character, right? And here's my question to you. Do you think you can have a good one-dimensional player character?
A good one-dimensional player character?
Yes.
No.
Really? Because I'm going to give you, if you're here very shortly, I'm going to give you a real good example. So think about player characters that have been what might be considered one-trick ponies.
Okay,
because that's kind of what one-dimensional characters are, and
yeah, I guess that does.
When I put it like that, does that change your mind?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, as a matter of fact, even the, I don't know if I like to use the term one-dimensional, but there can be player characters that are kind of puddle deep.
That's what one-dimensional is. But that doesn't mean that they're bad characters.
No, I mean, sometimes when you're talking about movies and stories, you will have that one-dimensional character, and he might just be there for comedy relief, but he brings about an entire new element of fun
Yeah,
to
whether
the
it's
story.
his lines of dialogue or the delivery, sometimes these one-dimensional characters can steal the scene or the show.
That's true.
My number one example of this is Hung.
Yeah.
Hung will always make trouble. Hung will always steal things. Hung will always punch his way out of problems.
That's true.
Through the entire first iteration of this character, none of these things ever changed.
No, that's true.
But he is still one of our most beloved
That's
and favorite characters
that is true.
that we have ever had in our tabletop games.
Yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Exactly.
Hung has always been fun. He's been fun to Game Master. He's been fun to play as a player character alongside.
If you're the game master of a chaotic character like Hung So Low, you have to stay on your toes.
That's very true.
Or else your NPCs start losing their heads.
Yeah.
So yes,
talk about the City of Lost Angels incident.
But whether or not your character is 1 or 3-dimensional, a 3-dimensional character has more depth to them. To go back to your puddle analysis, they have. Your 1-dimensional character can also have wants and goals, but they're usually they're less. They're often material. They are quick and easy to accrue.
Well, I mean that's a good contrast between, say, Aram and Bog.
Yeah.
Like Aram has very deep motivations. He has very long-running plans. He's a schemer.
He's a schemer, and he's also had the capacity to change, right? Like now he has a son that he cares about, right? Whereas Captain Hung So Low, that sex worker back in New Shanfan that he was frequenting, if he has a kid, well, sorry kid, it's Hung So Low.
Yes.
Whereas Aram, the dark, edgy warlock, has completely adopted into the role of fatherhood and having an emotional weakness, which is really what it is. It's a weakness, and he has not eliminated it from his life, and he has changed, and he's having a different arc. And both of these characters are awesome to have in a game. What about what else? What makes a good character? What about game masters specifically? Because a lot of what we talked about is either player facing or applies to both. What should game masters also take into consideration for NPCs, especially the villains?
Well, I mean, motivation is obviously a big one.
Yep.
Big one. Because if you build a good motivation for a character as an NPC, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to react to the player's behavior if you need to. If you don't know what your NPC wants, you're going to be thrown for a loop almost any time that the players do anything you didn't anticipate.
Right. Yeah.
Because you have to know how that character would react. I think it also helps, especially when you're talking about villains, to have a relatable backstory to them.
That's true. You have this is something you have done that even I haven't done, which is actually write short stories for bad guys. And the players will never see them.
Yeah, so sometimes, well, and for me, that's a part of the creative process. Like, I want to have that fleshed out back, and I don't do this for all my NPCs. Don't get me wrong. I don't have that kind of time.
Cool, important ones.
But yeah, the important ones, the big bad evil guys, the ones that are really going to help drive the story forward. It really pays dividends to have kind of a backstory for them, because that backstory for me helps me inform those motivations.
And you mean an actual 2 to 3 page backstory.
Yep.
Not just something that not just bullet points that you came up with in your head. You write actual backstories for villains.
I do tend to do that, because I think, and like you said, the players may never find it out, but with like Victor, for example, you've been kind of drip feeding the group little background information about him, which I find fascinating. I enjoy that quite a bit. The more Aram finds out, the more he's going to use it to exploit Victor's weaknesses, because that's how Aram is as a character. But even when I was playing Tusk, finding that information out as a player, even if Tusk didn't care as much as a character, I cared as a player because I found it to be very interesting. Having a background for your NPCs, it helps you. I think as a GM, it helps you to understand the motivations. It understands the why. And if the players ever catch wind of it, especially if you can have one of those kind of pseudo-sympathetic backstories, then what it does is it makes that NPC more than just a cookie-cutter cartoon villain.
Yeah, if you are trying to make a villain and you want them to be if you want to have emotional impact, make your villain sympathetic. Often the way to do that is to make them do evil things for what they think is good reasons.
Yeah.
And usually you can find a reason that at least half the party is going to agree with.
You know,
whether it be because they're doing evil things because they think that they're saving the world, or they're doing it for love or to save their family. You know, all these things that
everyone
you might
is the hero of their own story.
Exactly. Everyone is the hero of their own story, even the villains.
Your big bad evil guy could be an absolute monstrosity, but in his own head, he is the hero of his own tale. He is doing what he is doing because he thinks...
A perfect example of this, if you've ever played Borderlands, is Handsome Jack. Borderlands is a video game, and Handsome Jack believes he's the hero to the point that he calls the player characters the bad guys.
Yeah.
He calls them bandits.
He refers to them as bad. And I mean, he's a colossal jerk. He absolutely is. But in his own mind, everything that he is doing is for this perceived greater good of his. And I mean, you could take a completely insane NPC.
Oh, yeah.
But as long as that NPC believes what they are doing is for the greater good, that is going to inform a lot of their behaviors, and as soon as the players kind of figure that out, that's going to help the players to identify with that villain in some capacity.
Oh, yes. And now that I think about it, use existing content. Like, this is something you'll hear separate from other hobbies. In this hobby, you are encouraged to rip off trademarked and copyrighted things for your home game. Don't do it and then publish it.
Nope.
But for your home game with you and your 4 buddies, if you want to, go into the old temple and retrieve a lost artifact from a divine being, and there is a giant rock that chases them down a hallway, that's totally okay. But do it and then put some of your own weird spins on it. And you can apply that same concept to villains. If you're playing sci-fi and you want this dark, cloaked, evil guy with an energy sword and mystic powers, look no further than Darth Vader in Star Wars, but then put your own spin on Darth Vader.
There's nothing wrong with taking inspiration from existing media.
Exactly. In tabletop gaming, do it. And even better is if you can find existing media that your players don't know about, so then they just think you came up with it all on your own.
I've done that. I've done
Absolutely.
A lot of that.
If you're going to have your players take a ring to a volcano and there's like 4 halflings, a human, a dwarf, and an elf, and then some change and a wizard, that's a pretty obvious ripoff. But not everyone has read The Black Company, so then you rip off something from The Black Company, or these days a lot of people have not read that I know the Elric novels. Rip off something from that. Did you know in D&D 5th edition there is a famous sword that is straight up a ripoff of a book sword, and then it ended up getting like published in official content?
Nice.
And so D&D itself has a history of ripping things off. Halflings used to get called hobbits.
Yep.
Treants used to be called ents until the estate that controls Tolkien's IP
Decided they didn't like
turned
that anymore.
to TSR and said, "Excuse me."
Yep.
So
I mean, if you think about it, everything in the fantasy genre is derivative of Tolkien in a lot of ways.
yeah, everything in the eldritch horror genre is derivative of H.P. Lovecraft
and I mean,
at this point.
even Tolkien is actually derivative of a lot of old, like
Folklore and myths.
polytheistic religious tales.
Yeah, the Poetic Edda.
Yeah, I was going to say a lot
Irish
of
folklore.
Believe it or not, a lot of what made up the Lord of the Rings had to do with Norse mythology.
Yeah.
The elves and the dwarves and stuff like that were pretty early, parts of Norse mythology.
I remember I was trying to use like an Old Norse translator or High German. It was one of those two. And I was trying to come up with a cool name for like Iron-Walled City. And you know what I got? Isengard. So it turns out, yeah.
Yeah, it's and I mean, and I don't think that it's a big secret. I mean, I know that Tolkien knew where he got this stuff from, and I don't think he was shy about it.
He'd be the first to tell you, from what I understand.
Yeah, and that's fine, because that's, I mean, pretty much, there are pretty much no new ideas anymore. I mean,
and that's just kind of the way the brain works too. Like every new idea you have is built upon your previous knowledge.
Well, you might come up with something that you think is a new idea, and it turns out that it's just some artifact of something that you read 20 years ago
Right.
that you forgot that you read or you don't remember where the idea originally came from, and then when it bounces back into your skull, you're like, oh man, this is cool. This is a great idea. It's new.
Or someone beats you to publishing the idea.
Yeah.
Because there are 7 billion of us, and counting,
Yep.
on this planet. It's really hard to be original, and you shouldn't fret too much.
Don't beat yourself up too
Don't
much
beat yourself up
by
if
making
you
derivative content.
If you strain to be completely original, you're going to start tearing your hair out.
Mm-hmm.
So just take existing ideas and put interesting spins on them.
Make them your own.
Yeah, make them your own. I think it's Monty Cook. Do you know who that is?
No, that name is super familiar.
He used to be a designer on Dungeons and Dragons,
Okay.
and now he is in charge of Monty Cook Games. They are famous primarily for like the cipher system in Numenera.
Okay.
Excuse me. And he has I remember reading the front pages of Numenera, which is another book I have that have not run, but I think in it, I don't remember verbatim, so I'm going to paraphrase, but he talks about the 3 steps of weird. So if you're trying to make something unique, you try and escalate it 3 times with 3 unique, interesting spins on it. So rather than, it's like, oh, you've got a village of a tribal society. Oh, but also they're raven people. Oh, but also they have a third eye on their forehead. Oh, and the third thing is with their third eye, they can see energy or something like that. There's something like that.
That
So
feels a lot more unique than the original idea because you
Right.
took and added some stuff to it.
a lot of existing designers have little snippets of advice out there, and just be a sponge and absorb that advice. I can parrot some of their advice off to you, but whether you get it from me or straight from the horse's mouth, listen, pay attention, and then implement these things, because just like science and math and art and culture, this hobby is also built upon the shoulders of giants.
Yep.
So take inspiration from what has come before. And you can make incredibly interesting characters, whether they be NPCs or villains, your player characters that you might be running. I have a personal pet peeve, actually, that I'm going to bring up now.
All right, do it.
You can totally be inspired, but your game master might not appreciate it if you show up and your character is just straight up named Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Personally, it takes me out of the experience.
I'm the same way. Like, it's fine to take inspiration and to make a derivative character. But if you're just photocopying, Dritz or some other character from some other...
Yeah, good example.
Yeah, I was going to say, I guarantee you that there are 1,000 GMs out there right now that are like, why does this player keep bringing me this, dual-wielding...
this dual-wielding drow elf?
Yeah, why is this a thing? Why are we still doing this? And it's not because you can't make a cool dual-wielding drow.
Right.
It's because you read the novels and you thought, I want to be this guy.
Yeah.
Don't be that guy.
Be
the guy that was inspired by that guy.
Exactly. Be that guy, Mark II.
Yeah, like be the kid that guy bumped into during one of his adventures and decided, I want to grow up to be like him.
Right. Like
Like-
you said, make it your own.
Yeah, exactly.
I think another thing that can make for some interesting characters is... here's something that you don't need to do to be an interesting character. A lot of people will say... I have my own friends that say, no, I prefer it this way, but you don't need to do a funny voice.
No.
You do not have to do the accent. A lot of role playing is just making decisions that the character would make instead of you. But
I think that
voices can be really fun and funny.
voices are super fun, but I think a lot of people get hung up on the idea that they have to do a voice.
They do.
So every character, instead of saying, okay, well, this is my character, and having a good, cool, fleshed out background, and having a concept, they're like, what manner of voice am I going to give them?
Yeah.
And then they're like, well, I'll either make him with a German accent or a Russian accent or whatever. Not because it was required, not because it even necessarily fits the character.
Yeah,
But
they
because
feel like they need to do a
feel
voice.
like they need to do a voice. You don't need to.
You do not.
If you think the character would be fitting with a voice and you're capable of doing the voice, do that. But don't feel like you have to shoehorn a voice into the character. It's not going to be necessary.
Another thing about creating characters is if you know anything about the hero's journey or like good characters in literature and movies, you know that good characters struggle. So you should be accepting and open to the idea that your character has flaws. Because having flaws makes for a good character. Overcoming adversity, rather than just being a Mary Sue and just being good at everything they do right off the bat, shows that this person is willing to persevere. They have the capacity to grow and change and adapt. You want this character to have flaws because that's something that's interesting. If your character is good at everything in a team game, then why is there a team?
And you know,
right?
that was a mistake that I tried to make with Aram in his initial build. I wanted to give him a spell for every situation.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to have to expect the rest of the party.
Yeah, before we ever started playing 5th edition, like for real, you were trying to figure out how you could get like one of every cantrip.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So you could do every damage
I was
type.
taking feats that would allow me to buff out my cantrips. I chose the spell book as my patron thingamabobs
because
I got extra cantrips.
3 more cantrips.
I mean, don't get me wrong, the ritual spells are way more valuable than the cantrips were, but at the time I wasn't really paying a lot of attention to that. And when I went through and did his build, because I like to build out my characters, like I'll put together spreadsheets and plan these guys all the way out to level 20. And I struggled a lot because I was like, I need him to be able to do everything. Don't do that.
You forgot it was a team game.
Don't be Lance. Remember that you have an entire party at your disposal, and if you play nice with them, you can probably get them to do things for you that you couldn't do yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Which brings up a good point. You can, because you were worried about the mechanics of your character.
Yeah.
You were willing to make a deal with an eldritch entity.
Yep. Well, and that was
So you could that's something you can do is let the mechanics of your character, mechanics being the way your character interfaces with the rules, let the mechanics of your character inform who your character is, and vice versa.
Yep.
Whether you are playing in a system where it's better to roll for stats first, or whether you have a concept in mind, you shouldn't say, hey, never ever be the guy who's like, oh, I think I'll be the dedicated healer of the group. But then you pick a class that is focused around turning into a bear and charging into the front lines, right?
Yeah.
You know who you are.
Don't do that.
So, don't say, I'm going to play the hacker and then only take a pistol skill and first aid abilities.
Yeah.
Right? You bring the whole package together by working with the other players. If you're the game master, make your NPCs cohesive. If you have a gang of bandits, have the strong one. It's okay to fill those archetypes.
Yeah.
Have the big strong one.
Have
Have the weaselly one.
Yep. Have a tank in there. Have some guys with some ranged abilities and stuff like that too.
Oh yeah, we could do an entire episode on designing your NPC groups for combat encounters.
And probably will at some point.
We'll do that. And we'll touch on that in the future, maybe next episode. But for the time being, keep in mind that you can just rip off existing content, whether it's your favorite book, novel, TV show, anything like that. Know that you can work with the other people in your cooperative tabletop role-playing game to build interesting characters. Just take the extra steps to make them your own, and give them interesting motivations. And when I say interesting motivations, it's okay to play a mercenary who wants money, but think about why he wants that money. Mm-hmm. Maybe you've got... I often think about, for those who don't know it, there's an anime called Cowboy Bebop, and there's an episode, I think it's like 2 or 3 or 4, it's very early in the show, the main character Spike meets a guy who is working for this gang, and he steals from them this incredibly rare flower, but he does it. He puts himself in this danger, not from monetary greed, but because this flower is the primary ingredient in a cure for an illness that his sister has. Mm-hmm. And that is just, tearjerker right there.
Oh, not only that, but if you have players like that, or NPCs like that, when you put these things together, it's those kind of things are going to help drive a story more than just throwing boatloads of gold at them.
Absolutely.
I mean, in most fantasy settings, an adventure given a long enough period of time gets so ungodly rich that money can't be their motivation for what they're doing, because they would just open a bar and retire somewhere. But on the other hand, if they have a family member with a rare illness that can only be cured by a flower that grows inside of the lair of this dragon,
Yeah.
then they're gonna do whatever they can to gain the power necessary to kill that dragon to get that flower, in order to really, you know, sink home that motivation and get it done.
Make sure as the player that you give your game master enough carrots for them to dangle on a stick in front of your character.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's going to make it easier for the game master to prep the game, and it's going to make it more interesting when your character gets to pursue personal goals and bring their buddies along for the ride.
Accomplishing a personal goal is so much more satisfying for a character than just getting money.
Yeah.
Like loot and treasure hoards.
It only goes so far.
Yeah,
a lot of games start off with that concept, but no game, I would say very few, if any, games run from levels 1 to 20.
With the motivation of money still being there.
Yeah, with just get money. It'd get old real fast.
Yeah.
So take all of that into account and stride forward, because Grognak says it's last call. And I hope you've enjoyed your time with us here today. I hope the hearth has kept you warm and you've enjoyed your beverage, whether it was alcoholic or age appropriate. You don't need to drink alcoholic beverages, regardless. I want to stress that if you want more of us, keep your ears and eyes peeled on Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify. I personally listen to podcasts on Spotify as much as possible. We are not sponsored by Spotify. We are brought to you by the Record Button Production Group, who you can find on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as well as YouTube, where these videos are uploaded. There is the specifically recordbuttongroup.com, and then there's actually a merch store. We don't have merch yet, but for the other shows, there's trbmerchstore.threadless.com. If you want to email Lance and I, you can email us things about the Game Master Speakeasy at gmspeakeasyofficial@gmail.com. I think that about wraps it up, Lance. You got anything else you want to say?
No, man, I think we're good.
All right. Well, then all I have to say is to all of our viewers, can't wait to see you next time you're here, and please get home safe.
See ya.